The situation in Belarus has exploded into one of the most dramatic political crises in Europe in recent years. Across the streets of Minsk and other major cities, people have poured out in massive numbers, waving red and white flags and chanting for the end of Alexander Lukashenko's rule. For years, Belarus has been tightly controlled under his authoritarian government, but something extraordinary has just happened that no one could have predicted. A mutiny that threatens to topple not just Lukashenko's regime, but the very balance of power between Russia and its closest ally. The world was stunned when reports surfaced that Vladimir Putin, long considered Lukashenko's biggest backer, may have turned against him. The very foundation of the alliance between Moscow and Minsk is now shaking. The people are angry, the government is panicking, and Russia's next move could change everything in Eastern Europe. The story began when whispers spread that the Kremlin had grown tired of Lukashenko's unpredictable leadership. For years he had played a careful game, relying on Moscow's money, military support, and energy deals to stay in power, while occasionally flirting with the West to extract concessions. But after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Lukashenko's balancing act became harder to maintain. Belarus became a launching pad for Russian troops, missiles, and logistics. The Belarusian people, already suffering under sanctions and economic hardship, began to feel the weight of isolation. Discontent simmered beneath the surface, and when rumors emerged that Moscow might be planning to replace Lukashenko with a more loyal figure, that simmer turned into fire. Thousands took to the streets, not just in protest of Lukashenko's government, but against Moscow's interference. For the first time, anti-Russian slogans were being shouted alongside calls for democracy. Crowds in Minsk, Grodno, and Brest chanted for freedom, carrying banners that read, "More, no more puppet of Moscow." It was a dangerous and defiant message. Police tried to suppress the protests with tear gas, stun grenades, and water cannons, but the crowds only grew. The Belarusian state, once feared, suddenly appeared fragile. Behind closed doors, Lukashenko reportedly raged at Putin's betrayal. Sources close to the presidential administration leaked that Lukashenko had demanded an emergency phone call with the Kremlin, accusing Moscow of orchestrating the unrest through information campaigns and intelligence leaks. In his anger, Lukashenko reportedly said that Belarus would never become another Russian province. But the Kremlin's silence was louder than any statement. Russian advisors were quietly pulled out of Minsk, and Russian state media began to distance itself from Lukashenko's image, referring to him as embattled, a word they never used before. That was the signal Putin was done protecting him. Inside the Belarusian government, fear spread like wildfire. Ministers who once swore loyalty began to panic. The intelligence services, traditionally pro-Moscow, were divided. Some officers switched sides, helping protesters organize safe zones and releasing information about government plans. Others remained fiercely loyal to the president, enforcing curfews and detaining journalists. The army stood uncertain. Commanders hesitated to act against civilians, aware that the tide of history was turning. Internationally, the reactions were immediate. The European Union condemned the violent crackdown, and the United States called for new sanctions against Belarusian officials responsible for human rights abuses. Poland and Lithuania opened their borders for refugees escaping the chaos. NATO forces near the Belarus border went on alert, fearing that Russia might use the unrest as an excuse to deploy troops. Yet, for all the noise abroad, the most unpredictable player remained Russia itself. Putin faced a dilemma: intervene to save Lukashenko and risk another costly occupation, or let him fall and risk losing influence in Minsk. The people of Belarus, however, were determined. After years of silence, they found their voice again. Social media was flooded with videos of massive demonstrations, women forming human chains, and workers going on strike. State television channels were hijacked by hackers broadcasting footage of police brutality and government corruption. The message was clear: the era of fear was ending. Lukashenko tried to calm the nation with televised speeches, accusing Western intelligence of orchestrating the uprising, but his words fell flat. The people no longer believed him. As the crisis deepened, the Belarusian ruble crashed. Banks limited withdrawals and gas stations ran dry. Panic spread across the country as rumors circulated that Lukashenko and his inner circle were preparing to flee to Russia. Yet, the president appeared in public, wearing military uniform, declaring he would die before surrendering his country. His image of defiance might have inspired some, but to most Belarusians it symbolized desperation. In Moscow, Putin faced his own storm. Russian analysts were divided on whether Lukashenko was still an asset or a liability. State-controlled TV hosts debated cautiously, acknowledging that Belarus had internal instability, but avoiding blame. Some Russian military commentators hinted that if Lukashenko fell, Russia might have to secure Belarusian territory to protect its borders. The world braced for the possibility of Russian intervention. What makes this crisis so different from the past is the shifting loyalty within the Belarusian elite. For years, they were completely dependent on Moscow for survival. Now, many of them are quietly reaching out to the West, seeking guarantees and escape routes. Diplomats stationed in Europe have begun defecting, declaring support for the people's movement. Even within Lukashenko's family, divisions are rumored. His son Viktor, long seen as his successor, has reportedly disappeared from public view. Amid speculation, he fled to Moscow. On the streets, protesters continue to defy curfews. In the capital, makeshift barricades have been erected, and students are organizing underground resistance networks. Local police have started negotiating truces with protest leaders to avoid bloodshed. Videos show moments of soldiers lowering their shields, refusing to attack civilians. These acts of courage have fueled hope that Belarus might finally break free from decades of dictatorship. But with that hope comes the risk of chaos. The economic toll is devastating. Belarus's trade routes through Russia are disrupted, Western companies have suspended operations, and inflation has skyrocketed. Factories are idle, and unemployment is rising. Ordinary people struggle to buy food and medicine. The cost of rebellion, both literal and figurative, is immense. But many Belarusians say it's a price worth paying. For them, freedom has no alternative. Putin's move against Lukashenko, whatever his intentions, has backfired spectacularly. Instead of securing Belarus under Russian influence, he may have unleashed a revolution that could spill over into neighboring regions. If Belarus succeeds in shaking off Moscow's grip, it could inspire similar movements in other post-Soviet states tired of Kremlin control. The idea that Putin's power is absolute is being questioned like never before. Even Russian citizens, watching events unfold, are beginning to wonder if change could one day reach Moscow itself. Inside the Kremlin, Putin is calculating his next step. Deploying troops could restore order, but it could also provoke a Western response and drain Russia's already stretched military resources. Letting Lukashenko fall might weaken Russia's image of strength. Either way, Putin is caught in a dilemma. A rare moment of vulnerability for the man who built his legacy on control. Meanwhile, Lukashenko's grip on power is slipping by the hour. State TV employees have resigned, police commanders are defecting, and his propaganda machine is collapsing. International isolation grows tighter. Even China, one of the few countries that supported him, has issued a cautious statement calling for a peaceful resolution. That's diplomatic language for distancing from a sinking ship. In the midst of all this, the people of Belarus continue their struggle. Every night, despite fear and fatigue, they gather under the cold autumn sky, chanting for a future without fear. For them, this is not just about one man or one regime. It's about dignity, sovereignty, and identity. After decades of silence, they are rewriting their history with courage. The world watches closely as this drama unfolds. If Lukashenko falls, it will mark the end of an era, not just for Belarus, but for Russia's influence over Eastern Europe. The geopolitical consequences will echo across the continent. A new fault line is emerging between Moscow and the West, and Belarus has become the battleground for that invisible war. Whether the country descends into civil conflict or rises as a democracy will depend on what happens in the coming days. For now, one thing is certain: Belarus is standing at the crossroads of destiny. The old world order that kept Putin and Lukashenko in power is breaking apart. The people once silenced are now roaring, and no amount of repression, propaganda, or external manipulation can fully silence that roar again. History is being written in the streets of Minsk, a story of rebellion, betrayal, and the unyielding human spirit. The mutiny in Belarus is no longer just a domestic uprising, it has become a symbol of resistance against authoritarian control across the region. Putin's attempt to manipulate his ally may end up weakening his entire sphere of influence. As nations prepare for what comes next, one truth stands clear: the winds of change are blowing across Eastern Europe, and neither Moscow nor Minsk can stop them now. The people of Belarus are paying a heavy price for their freedom, but they are determined to see it through. What began as anger against corruption has transformed into a nationwide movement for liberation. The final outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is beyond doubt: the era of blind loyalty to Russia is ending. A new chapter in Belarus's story has begun, one written not by dictators but by its people.